Tutorials for the Sewing Connection, Series 15, Program 9. Anytime you enjoy making a project once, or perhaps several times, soon your thoughts turn to alternatives. How else can we make the clutch bag of Series 14 is what your letters have asked. Let's add on to it and make a double clutch. Just for reference, here is what the clutch bag was from Series 14. Here are a couple of samples. Actually, we had about a dozen of them then. We did really a lot. And most of them are included in a pattern, but they're fun things. They're easy to make. And this time we're just going to double it. I made them a little bigger along with getting it 2 compartment instead of 1. And the size is not important. You make it as large or as small as you want to. In fact, use it larger than this still. Attach a strap to it and use it for a shoulder bag instead of a clutch. It's very easy to change. Well, what this is 2 compartments instead of 1, so a double clutch. And we have one compartment that opens up here, and then we have another compartment that opens up here. And I tried, as I was doing this, a few different cords to see what I would like to put on it. And I think I put most of them on, just couching them on, using probably a cord foot or a braid foot and holding the cords in place so you can just zigzag over them. So this is what it amounted to, and not bad for a prototype. I guess I could actually use it. It turned out quite well. But here's how it all starts, with a pattern. And this is just a very easy little pattern that I drew, and just in case you want to draw one also, I'm going to move this over so you can see what the measurements are. If I put this pattern here, mine is about down to 18, so I have a ½ yard of fabric here, and that section of it's 18, and over this way it's about, a foot, and then I have a little inner section, and this one is just smaller. You can see it's about 2/3 of the size of the other one, and just slightly narrower because it needs to be inside the bag. So that's how I made mine, and I decided, since I had 2 compartments, let's make one of them point over one way and the other one point over the other way. And you can change that shape also, just any way you want. I just happen to make these all the same shape. Well, once you decide this is what you're going to do, then let's think of what we're going to put together, because the planning stage is really the most fun stage anyway. So here's one I have in the planning. I haven't started on this yet, but I had this little scrap of embroidered fabric from India. It's all hand embroidered, and I thought that would make a great one. And what I'm going to do with that is probably put it on like this, turn it on an angle, and I'll probably put it down here at the point. And then I'll put some other fabrics over the rest of it, so that, just pick out some solids from the colors that are in that embroidery and cover it all, fuse it all on, trim off the extra, and I have the outer part of the bag. And then I have still another color here to use for that little inner flap. So this is how I plan mine. I also thought those colors are the same as this fabric, this flowered fabric left over from something else I have. And so I'll just use that for the lining. And then I just happen to have these things from India, and because they're red also, I thought, yeah, somewhere they'll go on the outside of this bag. I don't know where yet, because it kind of evolves as it goes along, and you don't necessarily know when you start exactly how it's going to be, or at least I don't. Sometimes it sort of changes direction somewhere through it. Well, what you're going to need for that is the outside layer, then the fashion fabric layer, which you already saw in the reds. I'm going to combine them for the outer layer. And then you need the lining layer, which is where I'm going to use the flowered. And then against that lining layer, you're going to have some interfacing, just to beef it up a little bit, make it a little stronger. And this is a fusible interfacing, whatever kind you want to use. It doesn't make a bit of difference. But notice that I have one bigger one and one smaller one. That's, of course, because I have the outer bag, the big one, and the inner bag, the small one. And so this is why I have these different sizes. Now notice I didn't cut them out. They are just rectangles right now, because there's no sense in cutting all these pieces in advance and then finding out that, it's hard to make the edges of them mesh just right if you didn't cut them perfectly. Also, because that clutch from last time was very easy. It was just a curve around the edge. Left and right was the same. This isn't. left and right go out at different angles. And the more pieces you cut out in advance, the more confused you're going to get, and the fusibles might be facing the wrong direction. So leave them uncut for right now. We'll sew them together first, cut later, and that way you can't make any mistakes. The only pieces I would cut to size with the pattern are the fleece layers, and this is a fusible fleece that you can get in any interfacing department, and this is what's going to be fused to the wrong side of the outer bag. The fashion fabric is what will be fused against this. So this, do think, okay, how is that going to go? And what I have done so I can make no mistakes is that I've just written on my pattern how I want this to be. For instance, here is the intersection right here. And so I've written on there that the lining side is going to be down when I cut it, so that means if it's a print, it'll be up. The lining right side down. No, if it's a print, see what I mean? You can get confused. If it's a print, it'll be down. The wrong side will be up. And then the interfacing fusible side down against that lining. So this is why, because it's this one-sided shape, I want to know. And the same way for the fashion fabric and its fleece. I want to know which one's up and which one's down. So write it on your pattern, and you can make no mistakes then and have to recut something because it doesn't work. So once I have these all cut so that they are done just the way my little directions told me, then I'm ready to start working on it. Here's another one that's in progress, and I'm going to, in a minute, go to the machine and show you how I have this started. But you can see I do already have this fused. And this is one of the most important things, whether you're working with this double clutch or if you're working with that single clutch from last time. A really good press job is very important here. Steam iron, press cloth, spray bottle if you need it. If you don't have a big enough source of steam in your iron, get plenty of steam and really press it flat, because then when you're finished it looks very professional. If you let it kind of puff and not do a really good pressing job, it really looks homemade. So be careful about how you do that. Well, this one I already have fused to the fleece. And what I'm ready to do is sew the piping around the outside. And so on all these bags, I'm sewing piping to them at this stage of the game. On all of those bags that I made back in Series 14, I did not have piping. I just had a cord that was not on the tape, and so that cord was stitched on afterwards. It was zigzagged with monofilament thread. So we just have a few variations this time from last time. So it's a little bit different, even though it's generally the same idea. Okay, this one I'm going to put the piping on, and then what would happen after the piping's on, and I also have this all finished with the piping on. This is the outer bag. Aren't you impressed with all that piecing I did? Just look at all that wonderful gradation as the colors go from one to the other, up and down. Now, do you think that took a ton of time to figure out how to do it? Well, I must admit, I fudged a little bit. It's really a plaid fabric that I have just put on. And then what I've done is just do some stitching in between each line just to outline it all, with some metallic thread. You can see on the back side that I've just stitched that. So really it was a pretty quick job. I did not do the piecing. If you were ready to say, oh, I have that piece of fabric and I know better, okay, I admit it, I didn't do it. Well, then I'm also planning what else I'm going to do with this, and I have a choice of maybe putting buttons on each flap as I did on my prototype, or maybe I will put some Velcro. And if it's going to be Velcro, on this one, the lining is going to be this deep purple. And so where the Velcro would be on the lining side, I might use this. I didn't have any purple Velcro, but I did have this navy, and it would probably do well on the purple. It wouldn't show very much. On the outside of the bag, where the Velcro would be instead of the buttons, then I do have some turquoise that I will put on the outer bag. Of course, it'll be under the flaps, so it won't really show except to you when you open it. But if you can get different colors of Velcro, it's kind of nice to have that. Also, it dyes. If you would like to dye it, that's a possibility, or paint it with a magic marker. What I have here is some piping all made, or some little tubing all made for the button loops, which I would also attach to that. So this one is, the outer bag is finished, and it's all piped. The inner one is ready to be piped, and then it's going to be stitched to the lining. So I'll take this one with me over to the machine and we're going to stitch, but I might as well show you the rest of it, and we'll take the whole stack of it over to the machine at once. After I get that done, I'm going to line that flap, and I am not going to line the bag at this time, but I guess we'll just go to the machine and then you can see why I'm not going to do it at this time. I'll take this also. This is going to be a third bag, and I'm working on all of them. Now this is a good way to do it if you're going to make several. These make marvelous gifts, or they make marvelous bizarre items, and if you're going to make several of them instead of just one, it's really a good idea if you mass produce. You know, cut all the interfacing and then cut all the, whatever it is, cut all of the things first, fuse all the pieces second, and just, you know, work them that way, and you get the whole thing done a whole lot faster. If you do it that way, it isn't that much longer to make several bags as to make just one bag. Well, first we're going to do piping for this, and the easiest way by far is to use a piping foot because it has a little groove under the foot, and that holds it just right, really right in place so that you can get that stitching perfect next to the piping. So I like to use that foot. Generally, it doesn't come with your machine, and so go to your dealer and see if they don't produce one, and if so, then you need one. Go ahead and get it. Okay, this is just going to be straight stitch the whole time. I'm not going to be doing any fancy stitch at this moment. I may eventually, I'm not sure right now. But what I'm doing is putting some yarn inside. This is never going to be washed. If anything ever has to be done with it, it will be dry cleaned, so I don't need to worry about how compatible things are. And so it's just putting the cord inside and stitching it. And as long as I keep that yarn pushed to the fold, pushed toward the fold, then the foot's going to channel it just perfectly, and it'll do a fine job. And what I have done, I'm afraid, is pull it off as I was trying to work ahead and get some of this in place. So don't get too far out of the groove as you do this. Okay, well anyway, you just go ahead and stitch all this, and once you have it all stitched so that it's all ready to go, then it's ready to put on the bag. And to get it on the bag, it's going to be pinning it in place, and notice how that's pinned. It's going to be pinned with the raw edges all to the outside, and the good part of the cord is going to be inward, because after you stitch, then of course it flips out the other way once you put the lining on. Now notice on this, I didn't put it all the way to the bottom because this is going to be inside the bag. You'll never see any of this, so it just doesn't matter whether it's here or not, and there's therefore no sense in doing that. But this is going to also just follow the groove in the piping foot, and once I have that started, I'll take a pin out, or as you get toward a pin, be sure you take it out before you get there so that you don't hit it. And notice what else I like to do. For one thing, put my needle down position, because when I get to that corner I want to turn it. But for another thing, what I've done at the corners is in advance I've clipped the corner, because I would like to have it go smoothly around the corner. If you don't clip it, it won't do that. It will instead just pull and roll, and so it must be clipped. I'll take this pin out before I turn the corner, and then go ahead and go up to the corner. And once I'm there, go ahead and turn it. One more stitch. Okay, turn it, and here's where a knee lift really comes in handy, if you have one, so that you can keep your hands on the bag. And if it sort of scoots along because of the thickness, because of the loftiness, and really that fleece is not very lofty, it's pretty flat, but if it scoots along at all, realize that from time to time you might want to stop and adjust it so that it can sort of scoot back and get in place rather than pushing along. And this also is a good place to always have that needle down position when you're doing this type of work, so that you don't have to worry about losing your place when you lift the presser foot. Well, after this is stitched all the way around, then what we're going to do is line it. And this one I'm not going to line, but I'll just show you how. It's going to be put on, I have two pieces of lining here, and notice they're both interfaced already. So the fusible's there, but here's the small piece. And oh, this I still have all in one piece because that was more efficient. Okay, Well, anyway, what I want to do with this is not put it in the center. I want to, after I have the piping stitched on, I want to put it here because I don't want to waste any of that. I'm going to need it at the other end. And notice how I have right sides together. So I would put this down and I would just follow my stitches all over again where I just put the piping on and stitch a seam all around. After I have that seam stitched, that's when you can cut it out right along the edge, and it makes the job a lot easier. That way you don't worry about getting things together. They're of course going to be together, and so it won't make any difference. Well, after you get that all stitched on, probably trim off those 3 corners and then go ahead and turn it right side out. And when you turn it, it's going to look like this. Now this one's already done, but it is not lined, and it's not going to be lined yet, eventually. But these 2 pieces are ready for the next stage as soon as I get to them. Then here's the next stage where I have already turned this after it was stitched. I've turned it right side out, and then I took it over the ironing board and did some pressing, because see how flat it is? I really got it very, very flat. And this was also a piping. It's that cord. It was a commercial. I didn't do this, but it's this braided cord, and it was on some bias tape is how they had it all put together. And therefore, it was done the same way as I did the turquoise, and now when you turn it right side out, the cord pops to the outside. So that was all turned. And when I did that stitching, by the way, when I stitched this to the right side of it, to the fashion fabric, I left this much open right at the center because you have to have an opening for turning it. And also, when I cut it apart, when I cut it out, I didn't cut that short. I'll just bring this back for a second, because when you turn it, it makes it a little bit easier if you don't have, right here is where I'm talking about. This is going to be the straight edge here, and the pointed edge is down there. But when I did this stitching up here, I had plenty of extra fabric there, you can see at the top, and I didn't trim that off short. Now where I would have stitched would be from here on around to here and left this middle part open. But see all this extra fabric? Now this is kind of slippery fabric, even though it is reinforced by having that interfacing on it, fused on it. Still, by the time you turn it to the inside, tuck it to the inside to press it, it's going to press a lot easier and turn a lot easier if you have long enough seam allowances here that you can tuck easily. And just press it and then stitch it together. Now notice how I stitch this one together. You can see my stitching line on both the top and also the bottom, both sides of it, which doesn't make a bit of difference. Remember, this is going to be deep inside the purse. This is actually the bottom of the purse, and then it stands up and the flap comes up here at the side. Nobody will ever see that, and so it doesn't make any difference. If I used a contrasting thread, never will it show. Okay, so this one's all finished, pressed, and ready to go. Now I'm still not going to line this big part of the bag, because what you need to do with this flap now is attach it to the lining. And where you attach it, I have it attached here, you need to have a mark, which I did on my pattern, and I didn't bring my pattern over here with me, but that pattern, remember, is divided into 3 pieces. I had this part and this part and this part. As it rolls around, this is how it's going to be. And so because it's that 3 pieces, I had those lines marked on my pattern, and you would want to mark them too, so that you know exactly how it's going to turn out. But that line, that bottom line, where the bag is going to stand if you stand it up, that is where exactly you want to stitch this. And so I'm just going to compare it with this and put it in the same place. Now, this is about 1/3 of the way up. And the reason for that is, the reason I'm doing this is because how would you get this in the bag later if you didn't sew it in now before you put the lining to the outer bag? I have turquoise here because maybe you remember this. I wore it, I think, on the last program. These are the leftovers from that outfit that I had on. And I probably won't wear this bag with that outfit, but I will wear it with some other taupe or black clothing. If you wear too much of the same thing, it ends up looking homemade. So I'd rather mix it up a little bit and not wear the 2 together. Well, anyway, right there is where I want to pin this so that it comes out just right. And so I will just compare these 2. and make sure that it's pinned in the same place. Sometimes when you have coordinates, it just looks so terrific together, because all those that I made the flap and the outside bag a little bit different, just because it gives some variety and makes it a little more interesting. Okay, notice how I'm going to put this down. It's going to be so that I'll get these lining pieces even right here, and I'm going to put this at the same level. And notice also, not only is it at this level, same as the other bag, but if you made them right, they should both, like a chorus line, all be kicking the same direction, so that they'll come out right when it's all finished. And I want to then just zigzag this in place. Now, I don't need a piping foot for this, because that was only to use with piping, so I'll just go ahead and change the foot here. Take this one off and put a standard presser foot on. And all I need to do with this is zigzag so that I get it securely attached. And you can straight stitch for that matter, but sometimes when you're working with thick pieces, you can just get a better line if you zigzag. I probably better get a couple of pins in, and not only have I put it on that third of the way mark, but I've also centered it so that I have seam allowances on both sides. Now, the reason that this is smaller is, of course, the next step after I get this on, I'm going to have to put the bag together, the inside that I have here and the outside. This is thick enough that I'm having a hard time getting a pin through. And I'm not going to very easily get it together, so a seam around the outer edge and turn it if this inner flap is any wider. That's why it's narrower. It has to be so that it stays inside nicely. Okay, let's get a little zigzagging done here. And again, for this step, it doesn't matter a bit what color you have, because it's not going to show. If I'm going to zigzag, I better push the zigzag stitch, and the standard will be fine, so I won't even need to adjust it. But really, this doesn't need to hold too well, so maybe I will just make the stitches a little bit longer. So I'll push them up, to about there. Make them real long, because there is no reason for it to be that securely fastened. This will hold it just beautifully. And for a lot of fabrics you use, you couldn't even probably bother to pin them the way I did there. But for this fabric, it's pretty slippery, and so I thought I better put a couple of pins there just to make sure I don't lose it and go off in some crooked direction. I want to cut these short and get rid of all these so they don't show. And then it's going to be ready to put together. Now, if this seems quick, of course I already had some of it done, and so that makes it quicker. But if it seems to be pretty quick, it really is. These are short projects. They're a fun way to use up scraps that you have left over from everything. And now we have the very same thing. These bags are the same. So they're ready for the next step, which would be on either of them, on both of them, just putting right sides together, putting this on top. And since I'm mass producing at this point, I'll just put the other one on top too. Again, right sides together, I'll put it on top. Now what I should see, and test it just to make sure you haven't made a mistake, what I should see when it's all finished is the inner flap here on the outside for right now, the outer flap on this side, and that's because when you stitch it and turn it, it'll be the reverse. Does that make sense? Okay, so now what we need to do is just stitch these together all the way around, and that's going to, again, need a couple of pins here and there. And as I stitch this all the way around, you can see probably in advance that I have a little bit of a problem here in that, what do we do about that flap? It's sticking out there. Well, let me get a couple of pins in and we'll get rid of that flap. And notice that I have this lining layer just a little bit longer, a little bit bigger than the bag, because I'm going to cut it off later anyway, and just for, because it's thick, just for that little extra there so that you don't have to worry about it, it's nice to have it extend just a speck bigger. When I cut it out, I purposely cut it larger, just because it's easier to sew. Well, let's get rid of this inner flap. So the way to do that is simply fold it inside. It's okay, we don't need it. Now look what happens when I fold that inside. This is kind of heavy, it's kind of thick. And here's that flat lining on the bottom, and that's exactly how I want it to be. Because as I smooth this down to put some pins in on both sides, both here and on the other side, what it does is build in a little bit of the lining still flat underneath. This is what is bumped up here in the middle. And so by doing this, I'm going to be pulling that lining tighter. And what that means is when it all turns right side out, the lining won't show around the outer edge at all because it's a little bit smaller. So it works out just perfectly. But you would go ahead and pin this down, and then again, just leave this open right here. You'd stitch from here all the way around, just a little shallow seam because you don't really want to bother to trim anything off. It's just going to be cutting the corners off so that it turns easily, and that's all. The rest of it's straight lines. So I'll just start here, stitch all the way around, and I want to do this stitching with the side up that has all the trim around it, because I'm just going to follow my line again. So you can see the stitching here. This is the side I want on top. If you would stitch with the other side on top, you'd have no idea what's happening. You're just blazing a new trail, and that's no good at all. So stitch all around here, turn it right side out after you trim, take it to the ironing board and really press it flat and tuck that inside, and then you're ready to just fold it up. I'll fold this one up. You're ready to just fold it up and stitch the outer edges here of the bottom one down. The flap goes over, the fastenings go on, and you're finished. And it's that easy, and it's kind of fun. Try a few of these out of those scraps, and once you have the scraps all mastered, then go out and buy some real expensive fabric. It only takes a half yard, and you can make a couple of bags out of that. Well, tuck that bag under your arm, and let's travel south to see some distinctive work being done in Guatemala and points beyond. Join me next time for Guatemala.